my whole entrepreneurial spirit came from the fact that I've been fired from every job that I've ever had. Always. If you're 10 mistakes away, when do you want to get started on the mistake making? You have to go in and you have to start making your mistake. There were a lot of companies in between where I'm at now and where I started, but in the early aughts, we got into search engine optimization, and that really fit well with the kinds of things that I like to do. It's a combination between enjoying working through and making a process more efficient, all situations and all processes, and think to myself, if we can do this better, why wouldn't we do it better? And I did start it very, very early, but that again also taught me how to do relationships and all the rest of that stuff. But it also developed in me an absolute love for the work. I don't care if I was washing dishes at a restaurant or selling AI consulting to companies that don't understand what AI is. There's a part of each of those things that's still just the work, and I love the work.
I wanted you to tell a bit about yourself. My audience doesn't know you, so I just wanted you to give us a brief kind of like description of what you do, who you are.
As a brief introduction, my name is Chris Robino, and I work in the digital marketing space. I'm an entrepreneur. I started building my first company when I was in college, and that began a long history of building up companies and selling companies. And all of that really started when I was a teenager. And my whole entrepreneurial spirit came from the fact that I've been fired from every job that I've ever had. I have a tendency to not handle the response, well, we do it that way because we've always done it that way. When I look at all situations and all processes and think to myself, well, if we can do this better, why wouldn't we do it better? Which then always led me to doing things better. So there were a lot of companies in between where I'm at now and where I started. But in the early aughts, '05, '06, '07, we got into search engine optimization, and that really fit well with the kinds of things that I like to do. Because again, I like it's a combination between enjoying working through and making a process more efficient to absolutely not being able to tolerate waste. And I think the not being able to tolerate waste is probably a bigger driving force to my wanting to optimize everything. But either way, they, not wanting to double up steps and do a whole lot of other things is kind of how this really started. And now that we're going into such a phenomenal age of having a lot of the steps done for you and done for you fast, it's a great time to be somebody who really likes to find ways of eliminating waste.
What made you start your first business?
Well, I started my first business when I was in college, and primarily I started that business because so I lived in a college town, and there were no jobs in the college town for anybody that decided to stay there over the summer. So I started a painting company when I was in college, and any of the rest of my buddies that were still there all worked for the painting company, which that was a lesson in everything from my roommate at the time and best friend, best man at my wedding, still to this day, would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and call all of my crews and tell them that it was raining and that we weren't going to work for the day. And then I would get out to all of my houses that were supposed to be painted and none of my crews would be there because my roommate called all my crews off, which I fired him many times from that same job, but he kept showing up and it was but yeah, my first job was painting company. That was also where I learned about the IRS. I was not aware of payroll taxes. I was at least smart enough to have hired a company to do that, so that was fine. But income tax, yeah, didn't really understand what that was until December of that first year. Then I learned it very, very well. That was also when I was in college and I switched from psychology and English to accounting and finance so that I would understand what it meant to do taxes. And so, but I did accounting and finance for about a year, started another company, sold the painting company, and then that was the end of my formal education, I suppose.
You sold the first company then?
Well, yeah. Again, it's kind of like, I sold my first company and then my first job out of college I had for like 6 months and they transferred me from one location to another location. And I mean, it was an absolute like lateral move, but I still told everybody I got transferred because I thought it sounded cool. To say that I sold a painting company in a college town to like another college pro painter place is, yeah, I could say that I sold the company, but yeah, we're not looking back over that paperwork going, wow, did you just kill it? I wasn't ready to retire. That's for sure. But all these little smaller businesses that I have started over the years were phenomenal from the perspective of what they taught me that I then took to the next company and said, okay, these are the things that worked really well. These are the things that didn't. Just make sure that you know the things that you're going from one to the next into.
Why I was asking that is because as you were explaining, I thought about learning just in time. Right? When we start a business, usually we don't learn that at school.
No, no.
If any, when we go to university, that's when we kind of like get the opportunity to do it. Just like you said, you change it to accounting and finance because then you had a need,
Yep. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then, and even like when you sold the company, you've learned a lot of things because again, it's not everywhere that you learn how to sell a company.
Right. And that's a good point from the standpoint too of after I sold that company, went back to school for a year, I got on with another company, and the specific reason I got on with the company that I got on with was because they told me that it didn't make any difference how long I had been in the business or how much education I had or whatever. They said, "We will give you as much as you can handle. The pay's gonna suck, but we will teach you everything that you can handle, and we will promote you based on how you handle that, and you can go as far as you want." And that attracted me because at that time, it was very traditional in that you had to do this thing and this thing and this thing in order to even be eligible for this thing and this thing and this thing. And I didn't want any of that. I just wanted to get my hands dirty and I wanted to figure out how everything worked. And then, I would sit in staff meetings with this particular company and look around the table going, these are all the people I have to beat to get to the next position and the next role, and I did. I mean, I was the youngest everything in that company for the 3 or 4 years that I was there. And I wanted somebody to pay me to write a budget and to do a marketing plan and to wear a suit and to shake a hand and to do a contract and all those things that I just didn't think it didn't make any sense to me from a business perspective that you were going to learn in like role playing in a class. I had to get out there and do it. And I went with the first place that said, yeah, we'll let you do as much as you want to do. It wasn't the, prettiest business. It was property management and parking lots and valets. And it was tough. It was a tough, tough business, but it was absolutely perfect. Every single person that worked for me was older than me. So, I mean, that was another, fantastic, learning opportunity. But that just gave me decades of experience that you just to me in any way I just couldn't get any other place. And I've had this conversation with you before and many others. The so in interviewing for new managers at that early job, what I learned after a couple of years of doing it so poorly was that it wasn't the amount of education these managers had that I was hiring, because I was hiring managers that had MBAs and they were the worst people for these jobs ever. They didn't know what a 40-hour work week was. They didn't understand what an hour-long lunch was. They didn't know how to write a budget. I'm like, when did you get your first job? And they're like, you are my first job. I'm like, you're 24 years old and this is your first job. And so the first huge lesson about managing teams and hiring and firing and all that stuff that I learned was, make sure the first question you ask is, when did you get your first job and what was it? And if it wasn't McDonald's, or I was a, paper boy, or I was a babysitter, or worked retail, or was a server, whatever, if it's none of those things, you are there's no job I will hire you for, because you don't know how to work with other people. You don't know how to deal with, rush hours and slow periods. You don't know how to deal with, customer service issues and all the rest of that stuff. And if you didn't learn how to do that, like, there's some people that, again, had the best intentions, where they went to school and their parents were able to say, you don't have to work, and the worst thing you could possibly do for these kids, because somebody's going to have to teach them how to do all those things. And if it's you and you're paying somebody because they've got a degree and they're in a management training program and they've never done any of those things, good luck. I was not the right person to teach you how to do those things. And all the people that, again, had jobs. I mean, I got my first job. So I got a paper route when I was 13, and I was forced to keep that thing until I got another job. I mean, I thought when I got the paper route, it was a joke, and like 2 weeks later, I wanted to quit it. And my dad's like, "No, you're not quitting that. You accepted that responsibility." And I broke my leg in the middle of it and still had to do the paper route. My mom drove me to all of the houses, and I had to throw the papers out of the window of the car for 8 weeks. So I got a job at a restaurant when I was 15, lied about my age to get the job, because that was the only way I was going to be able to get rid of the paper. But the job in the restaurant when I was 15 was also one of the best. I mean, I still remember everything about that. That that taught me a really good lesson about the dynamics of an assembly line. So if you work at a restaurant, especially a restaurant that gets super busy on a Friday, Saturday night, and you've got dishwashers and bus people and servers and cooks and all these people doing these different things, it only works if everybody on that line is doing the things that they know they have to do. And if, the servers are down, or the dishwashers, or the dishwasher breaks, or but if everybody does the things that they're supposed to be doing on that line, it's like a sporting event. 6 hours later, you're all smoking cigarettes and having beers, going, God, this is the greatest thing ever. I mean, that was, again, and there's only certain places that you can learn that. But I've got 3 kids, and that was something that I said to all of them, that you need to know how to serve really early in any kind of professional career you're going to do, because by having that background, it just helps with life. And again, you can't learn that in school.
It's interesting because some years ago, I've heard someone saying that everyone should have at least one decent experience, work experience serving others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because this kind of like teaches you the value of whoever will serve you for the rest of your day. So if you go to a restaurant, you've already worked in something similar. You know that that person is doing their best. That sometimes stuff that another customer was rude to them, and they're doing that work because usually it's kind of like their first job as well. And there is another. I can't remember who said that.
There's so many dynamics, again, that you can't get other places. There's that, I mean, you learn in a service business like a restaurant or a bar, or valet parking cars, or working at a golf country club. All of those things teach you about relationships, and teach you about people, and teach you about the other people that you're working with. For me, in those industries that I worked in all of them, I learned that rich people are horrible and the worst tippers, and, again, demand things like that nobody else would. And in a restaurant, that always made no sense to me. I'm like, do you just want me to spit on your food now, or do you want me to wait till I go into the back of the kitchen? And I mean, and other people, like, so my wife and I met at the bar that we worked at in college. And I mean, so when we go to a restaurant still to this day, 30 years later, and having 3 kids that have gone through, the service industry, whatever place we go to, whatever restaurant we go to, it starts at 20%. Like your tip starts at 20% when you sat us at the table because we were servers. For somebody to go below 20%, I mean, they really had to, do something that made no sense. So you can only go up from 20% because we'll never forget again how valuable that the stuff that we learned in that kind of place was to everything else that we've done. To again, I don't know I don't know a single entrepreneur, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people that have started businesses that didn't start out in that type of an industry. And again, it's not just customers, it's think about it. So again, in that same setup, if you're a manager of a restaurant and it's Friday night and you've got 10 servers on the floor and 3 of them don't show up, you're taking the slot of somebody else, you're on the phone call and others. I mean, all of those things that you need to do to, and again, that show's going on. People are coming to dinner. I mean, just so many things. So were your circumstances similar or were they different when you were in high school, for example? Where did you work, or did you work, or what was your, because I never did ask you this. I never did ask you about your first job. What was your first job?
Yeah, for me it was like my parents had businesses, right? My dad started many businesses, or he bought some of them. And I think the very first one that I started working, I was like probably like 10 years old. So it was like a candy shop, right? In those kind of like inner markets, like, yeah. And we had candies, we had like any kind of like treats that the kid would want. I had to sell them to other kids and to other adults. And I think the ruthless boss I ever had was my mom.
uh,
Japanese born in Brazil. She's like a sergeant. Like, put us in the line, 4 kids, 4 boys, all of them working. So for me it was like that. So there was no payment, but you had to
sure.
perform, because afterwards we had employees and we didn't have payment, but we had to work harder than the employees, so they they would take our lead. And in that sense, like, I couldn't even complain about my bosses.
Very good point. Yeah, it'd have been tough to go to happy hour, but again, you were 10. And you were also a kid in a candy shop. So when you're talking about again stories that people
Yeah.
want to hear, saying that you're a kid in a candy shop, I think is funny. But it would have been great to get your mom and my dad together. My dad, love him dearly. He was a great, great guy. I have a phenomenal relationship with him. But again, not letting me quit a paper route even when I broke my leg. Yeah, I think my dad and your mom could probably get together and write business books. Here's how to
Oh,
do child
yeah.
labor correctly. But you did say
Well,
something, so you got to experience another side of this that I didn't even mention, but you got to experience inventory control. You got to experience, what happens when, you know, in that business, it was always, at least for us back in those days, it was always, I'd love to, if you're going to ask a business school class, ask them what COD is and see if they understand. I mean, to a kid now that hears the term COD, it's like an LP record. They're like, what is that? Is that something you find in a museum? Back in the old days, COD was collect on demand. That meant that, depending on your relationship with your produce vendor, if you were a restaurant, when they dropped the lettuce off, you had a check form. There was no, 30, 60 days out. And I would assume it's probably similar in a retail shop where they're dropping off the candy to the store. You've already paid for it.
Yeah, there were some of them that were like that. You had to pay immediately, but there were some others was it was
Mm-hmm.
consignation, right? So it was just those were good ones, I
Oh,
would
yeah.
say. But I think this was one of the shops that my dad had. Like afterwards, he bought when he retired around 40, 40 little 45. I think when he was 45 he had already retired. He used to work for Mercedes-Benz. He was a big manager, and then suddenly he bought a factory, a pen factory, with a couple of friends from the office. He ended up buying their parts, and that factory moved to my house with two employees, and I've learned kind of like how they created pens out of aluminum discs. It was
Yeah.
beautiful. Like, yeah, it was beautiful. The employee showed me everything, and I was young. I was around 10, 11 as well. I tried some, really destroyed the plates, but it was that, and then polishing the pens. So polishing, it was easier for me. It was just brute force, but it used like a thick paste that left everything kind of like dirty, greasy, and dark gray, including your skin. So we use the protective glasses, but then your
Mm-hmm.
face, it would take forever to take that thing off, right? So I remember this, and then afterwards, my dad, I think he bought another company that was like for, yeah, it was a shop. He sold like screws and tools. That didn't work out too long, and then he bought a street shop in Brazil. So you go to some every single day of the week. You go and you set up the shop on the street. People come, they buy. This was also sweets, right? And that was the biggest business that we had. And because of that, he opened a shop at home, so we would sell the same thing in the neighborhood, right? So we had the shop at home, and then during the day they would put an employee at home because we were at school. My parents and some employees, they would go to the street shop while the local shop was running with one employee. When we arrived at home from school, we'd stay in the shop. During the weekend, we would have to go to the street market. So all my holidays, school holidays, were working full time for my parents. If not during school days, we were studying, doing the homework inside the shop. Right, like
So, so you said you've got three brothers. Where
yeah,
where are you in age range?
I'm the
You're the
third.
third.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
what do your other brothers do now?
My big brother studied law. He went to law school, but he didn't finish. And then, just like my dad, he started opening businesses. He actually took over these businesses from my dad. My second brother, he went to med school. Now he's a pediatrician, ICU kind of specialist. I studied biology, and then I did everything under the sun. English teacher, then I went to IT, then I became a web developer, software engineer, product manager, business coach. Now I have my own businesses. So, and then my youngest brother, he studied biology as well, and he became a biology teacher. So he teaches at school.
Interesting, it's all science
Yeah.
and two entrepreneurs. So when you were kind of growing up in that space, was there, because kids usually go one of two ways, right? Kids will like follow in that path, or it's like kids that grow up in a house where the parents smoked are either going to be smokers or anti-smokers, right? So you kind of look at it from the standpoint of, um, where what did you think when you were growing up in that, and what where like with me, like when I said I like to try to find ways of improving things, especially common things. And part of the reason that I like that is because I just don't like things that waste time. It just doesn't make sense to me that I'm going to do something because that's just the way that it's always been done, when it makes total sense to me that it should be done another way. What did you get out of kind of starting your work life early, which you did, that you then wanted to move on and do other things?
I think the main thing that I got out, it was a hard life. When my dad was a manager at Mercedes Benz, we had an easy life, and I told him, right, as I said, the best thing he did was to make us all work, because I would be probably an entitled prick if you kept that
Yeah.
job, right? Because we didn't feel rich at that time, but we had everything that we wanted, right? It wasn't like a private jet kind of thing. It was just like it was an easy life. But when my dad became a business owner, we all had to work hard. We had people to pay. I We had debt. I remember a lot of debt. We had employees stealing money from the business. We we found out about some of them. It was a hard life. It was always like short of money. Uh, and it was weird. Like now I understand. Like it was more cash flow. Sometimes we had money, we could spend it, and then sometimes we didn't, because if it rains, people don't go to the street shops, right? And then suddenly you don't have much control. And other times, like, oh, close to Christmas, you could sell a lot, make a lot of money. Close to New Year's, because people would buy a lot of stuff, right? So it was just like this inconsistency that when I turned 18, I remember I turned 18 and I told my mom, I said, look, I'm gonna find a job. She's like, oh no, but I can start paying you a salary. And I said, no, mom, you don't understand. It's like I need to find a job, because if you pay me, it's like you're taking money out of the same bucket and giving it to me. It's like if I find another job, I'm gonna get money from somewhere else and then put it in that bucket. And that's when she's like, yeah, you're right, just go. And that's when I became like an English teacher assistant. So, and I worked for 1 year. And it's so funny that you said like about like having a problem with like wasting time, wasting resources, right? I'm paraphrasing you in here, because this is literally what I saw as I was working. And I had worked so hard for like, I don't know, eight, eight, almost like 10 years before with my family. When I started working as an assistant, I could do so much more than just the thing that I had to do. So I started helping everyone, right? And then I started seeing that people were some there were some lazy
Hmm.
people, and then they sometimes would use the resources of the school, the English school, for their own benefit, which is kind of like, for me it was like stealing, right? And because I saw that happening in my parents' uh, companies, I'm like, what the hell is wrong with people, right? They have their own salary and they do that, right? So for me, it was always a conflict. Like for me, having a business meant it's really hard. You're gonna have to kind of like work hard, and it doesn't pay well. finding a job, it's good. You have in the end of the month, you have your money, right? And I took that for a long time until recently, like recently, like when was it? 2017 is when I kind of went
Yeah,
solo.
yeah. It's
That's
very interesting that you say that, because again, we've had so many different conversations, and it's so interesting the place where you and I both ended up, but we haven't really had this conversation about where we started. But
true.
here's some of the things that I'm kind of taking out of it, and I've had this conversation with others before. So when I was growing up, what I saw was my dad, who worked, we're from the Midwest, and my dad worked for Union Pacific Railroad, which back in the old days, Union Pacific was the railroad, and it was based in Nebraska. And he worked for Union Pacific Railroad for 20 plus years while I was growing up, and I'm the oldest of four, and I've got three younger sisters. And my dad was the smartest person, I knew back then, but he kept butting up against the ceiling, because he wasn't a good get along with everybody, negotiator slash sales like person. He was, or I should say, that part of him is very much like me. That's the part of me that gets fired from every job, right? But he had a family. He's like, I can't get fired from this job. But I watched him, do that, and it just seemed to me, from my perspective, that he hated his job, right? That he had to work all the time, and he never seemed to be happy when he came home from the job. And then on the weekends he would golf, and when he came back from golf, he never seemed to be happy about golf. And so I used to always tell my friends, there were two things I said I was never going to do, and that was work for somebody, because that seems to be miserable, and play golf, which also seems to be miserable. So those are the two things that I got from my dad, was watching him, you know, have this life that I thought, well, so it's different, but similar to exactly what you said, where you're like, the inconsistency of where you guys were at, because you had businesses, and you had seasonality inside those businesses, and you had all these different things that always made everything look chaotic, where sometimes you were just like, look, consistency would be great here. If I know that I have to do this, this is what I'm going to do. What was also interesting, though, about what you said is, you almost felt as though you had so much more time, because this regular job only expected, like, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, when you're like, man, I've been working 80 hours a week, 7 days a week. That was my old job. You're like, I have all this time. And based on that, kind of, and having the respect for how hard it is to work and own a business and all the rest of that stuff, I I felt that same way. But I also, what I wanted more than anything, again, your vision sounds much better from a altruism, help the family perspective. About, I mean, I loved how you said, if I go out and get other stuff, I can bring it and put it in the bucket. I was not that person, but I didn't like asking anybody for anything. And so the only way I could have money is if I went out and got a job, worked, and then I got that money, which then allowed me to do a bunch of stuff without having to ask other people to do it. I mean, that was my big thing. And I did start it very, very early, but that again also taught me how to do relationships and all the rest of that stuff. But it also developed in me an absolute love for the work. And when I say the work, I mean whatever it is. I don't care if I was washing dishes at a restaurant, or selling AI consulting to companies that don't understand what AI is. You know, Either one of those things, there's a part of each of those things that's still just the work. And I love the work. Always have. Always will. You guys need to know, everybody needs to have access to all of the AI tools that your company uses. And we've got a lot of companies that are like, oh, well, I don't want them to not do the work. And I'm like, that is the work. And if you don't give them access, give them the next 3 to 6 months to make all those mistakes, they're going to be 3 to 6 months behind. Also, I'm in the business of going to my clients and saying, let's look at everything that we can look at that will help you gain a competitive advantage over your industry. When we talk about using AI wrong, which is one of the topics that we're going to kind of touch on, so Morgan Housel wrote this book, and he's an author and a writer and a speaker, and also works for investment firms and a bunch of other stuff. He's very well known. I think he wrote The Psychology of Money, so he's very well known. He just wrote another book called The Art of Spending, and his concept is we spend all of our time working and glorifying work and building businesses and becoming entrepreneurs, and then in that same thing talking about how to save money and compound interest and all of these different things to get to whatever this place is. But we don't spend any time talking about what happens when you get to that place. If all you've done for the last 20, 30 years is build companies, be innovative, save your money, invest in other things, but you don't know how to retire, what's retirement going to then look like? Which happens to a lot of people. Nobody's going to listen to, the story of the guy that retired and 6 months later was dead because he didn't like to golf. That's not unusual, right? When too much of your life is also validated by that same, love of work or work product, it's hard to be able to say. But what I liked about that concept, because I read it this weekend when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about, was when we say that you're using AI wrong, it's because a lot of the things that we're doing with AI are just replicating tasks we already do. So when we use new technology and we say, okay, this new technology is going to help me do these things. When Microsoft Office came out in the 90s, and you and I had this conversation, for me, it was enormous because when I was trying to think of what my next business was going to be, it was going to be in accounting and finance, because that was the first place in the 90s that all the small businesses I was working with didn't know how to use. They were still using green sheets and paper to write down, just expenses and income, and you know versus spreadsheets. I mean, spreadsheets hadn't even really come into it. And so one of my then first businesses after that was accounting software, and installing accounting software into these small businesses for those same reasons. And before Office came out, before Microsoft Office came out, and Windows 95 came out for that matter, you were going to hire administrative staff to do all of those jobs. So I've told you this story before. So that management company that I started working at in the very, very beginning, you would write a memo. And when I say write a memo, I mean write a memo on a yellow legal pad, and you would put it in an outbox that a person would take out of your office, type on a sheet of paper, put in a folder, return it to your office days later. You would red pen that, put it back in your outbox where they would pick it up again. And you do this 2 or 3 times before you're like, this is good. And they would then, photocopy it and put it in cubby holes for all the rest of the team that you were writing this memo for. That's how we did it. And so, you're thinking about starting a small consulting firm, say, you better have $500,000 because you're going to, not make any money the first year, and you got to hire all these people to rewrite your memos for you, because that was the only way we had business communication. So then, Office comes in, it's like, you can just type your memo in this thing and send it out electronically, and you don't need anybody to, do any of this. And it's like your barrier to entry, was just absolutely wiped away when that came out. So again, as these things keep going on, what's very interesting is what was funny to me is in the early transitions of Office, that's what people would do. That all they did was, instead of putting it in a physical outbox, they sent it as an email to their secretaries or admins or assistants and said, "Red pen this up for me again and send it back." And it's like, okay, you're taking the technology and saying, instead of doing this for me, just do the same steps over again, just do them in a different format. Instead of paper, we're just going digital. And that's right now, that's what's happening on the AI side that you and I have talked about before. When we say you're doing it wrong, it's because you're not thinking about AI helping you with solutions instead of steps. So when you go into a chat prompt or you go in and you start doing research and it gives you a faster way to look at more data, and then it lines that data up in a way that makes you comfortable. I mean, myself especially, I can't tell you how many years I've spent building out spreadsheets and bullet point lists and slide decks and everything else. And so that's what we're using it for. We're basically just saying, do this faster, but then you still have to read it. You still have to edit it. You still have to, instead of saying, if it can do this, why can't it do this and this and this and this and this? And we're not pushing it far enough to say, there's got to be 10 steps in the middle of this thing that I can absolutely eliminate. Now, I might have to add one or two more from the editing perspective to make sure that it's, spitting out the right kind of stuff, but we're not doing as much as you could be doing with the new tools that are out there because we're just conditioned to think of all these things as better existing tools. When if you really want to use this the right way, they're not better existing tools, they're better new tools. And so for somebody like me who cannot stand waste, spending as much time as possible using those tools to eliminate the steps, not just make the steps faster, get rid of them. That's using AI, or at least I think that's the better way to think about AI.
I'm trying to figure out ways for us to use AI in a way of like streamlining the process. And trying to paraphrase what you're
Hmm.
saying in terms of reanalyzing the step by step the process to achieve that goal, to complete that
Hmm.
task, but in a way that is not just works faster and does things that, as you said, like the back and forth between like me writing something, someone reviewing it, sending it back, or me reviewing it, like sending it back. But trying to find steps in the process to be completely eliminated, hopefully using AI. So this is what what you're talking about when you mention using AI the wrong way. It's not like it's kind of like just the first level is just replace whatever we're doing and do it faster with AI. What you are suggesting is that we should go in a deeper level to take the opportunity to reanalyze the process and make it even more efficient and throw some of these steps away because maybe everyone does it but nobody looks at it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Which anybody that's dealt with AI at all, again, and goes to the bottom of whatever the email is, and if the bottom of the email is a question from a chat prompt that says, "Did you like this? Would you like me to write it in a different?" So you know that the person who basically sent you the prompt version of whatever came to you didn't even read it to take the time to delete the last thing that basically came from the chat prompt, which just cracks me up. So I'm going to give you a loose case study that'll probably have some holes in it, and I maybe this is going to work, maybe it's not going to work. I'm not sure, but because of what we were talking about last week, and because of what we're talking about now, on like Saturday mornings especially, it's one of my favorite times during the week because that's when I get to take more time and just have my coffee and read and read and read and read. And then I'll take the stuff that I'm reading and I'll, jot down in my, many notebooks the ideas that I really like or the quotes that I really like or the ideas that I really like. Well, now it's gotten worse into that I'll take one of those ideas and then I'll put it into either my chat gpt or my Gemini or any of the tools that I use and say take the article, take the concept, take the idea, and take whatever the persona history that I want you to take and give me these different things. We'll start to have this conversation. And one of the things that I started to go through on Saturday, which was really good because it's it's a it's a cornerstone of our industry. And when I say our industry, what I mean is marketing. And marketing is one of those industries that most of the clients that we deal with don't have marketing departments because they wouldn't know what to do with them if they had them anyway, right? So instead of having a marketing department, they're going to hire consultants and they're going to hire other vendors. And then in the same area that we might have specialty marketers like us who do search engine optimization or do things that are specific to digital services and things like that. And then we have consultants and vendors and people that do other parts of the same projects and the same campaigns. And our business has just always been that way. I mean, you might be able to point to some things in finance or some things in operations, depending on the industry, but marketing, we're just soaking wet with consultants, vendors, payment systems, and all of these other things. And our system is by design so inefficient. And we even with so it's like there's 10 of us and we all work together. And at any one time, any of the 10 can get the client. And then the client will be one of the 10 of us. And that person has to be the one that's responsible for communications and reviews and write-ups and making sure the other vendors are on time and pulling other stuff from the consultants. And look at the way that tree structure then goes, because then say it's me and my client, because that was the example that I ran through, which by the way is going to be a true story and other things that you and I are going to do. I have the client, they've just gone through a really big website redesign that turned out not just to be a website redesign, but they went from a platform that everybody knows in WordPress and they decided to completely redo the project in React. And by doing it the way that they did it, all of the normal SEO stuff that you would usually find in a WordPress site is completely gone and will have to be rebuilt on React. And to even think about and conceive what it's going to be like to take hard coded pages and do that, you're losing your mind. And so that's the client. And so I, as the lead consultant on that project, have to go find lots of different vendors that can do these things and interview the vendors and get estimates and pricing quotes and everything else. And then once that work starts, that's then my responsibility to make sure that the work's done on time. And then they have to bill me. And then I have to then turn around and bill the client. If you think about all of those steps that are being duplicated and triplicated based on who again, this tree just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And again, my client gets billed for every minute I spend thinking about the project. I mean, there's no other way to do it. I mean, I'm not, if I have to touch an invoice and pay it and write it up and see another dashboard or another report or ask another question or do, I mean, those are billable hours, and again, I might be able to write up a scope because I've been doing this for so long where I can say this is how this whole project's going to look and this is what it's going to cost. But there's still so many duplicated reports, so many duplicated invoices, so many duplicated meetings with all of these people that are in all of this stuff. So that's and again, if anybody that's in consulting, is in search, is in digital marketing, is in any of our spaces at all, is going to hear me say these words and they're going to be going, yeah, yeah, that's right. We do duplicate everything. But at the same time, because of our industry, that's just how you do it. Because none of us are going to have all of these skills, right? The larger firms or the more experienced consultants are going to have really good network groups of people that can do all these things. But still, I mean, there's no, you're not centralizing billing hubs for all of these guys saying, when you do my projects, here's how you have to do this so that it'll save me some time. It's still all over the place. But so I'm writing all of this up because I'm having this conversation with all of my LLMs based on something that I've got to send you that you're going to love. It was a column and it was called Seeing Software or something, and it was all about how you build software. And basically that whole thing that I just described to you, think about building software inside of a company that just builds software. All those same conversations are happening, they're just happening internally. and and the coders are then sent out to do something specific, and the coder's like, well, this is dumb, why are we doing it this way? And the other person's go, well, because it has to be done this way. And so I took all of that and said, gee, that sounds a whole lot like my industry. Flip that around into it being my industry. And so this conversation continues to go on. And long story short, by the end of it, which was a couple hours, I had a template inside of Asana. And inside of Asana, that template has all kinds of business rules that it helped me write that stops a project if something hasn't been filled out by either the vendor or the client. Because that's the other thing that happens. We play this game, myself especially. I've been doing it for 20 years. We play this game where we've got a big, huge project board up on our wall, right? And then we just play this like Plunko style, dartboard style. I'm going to move these people over on this project because this one's ready to go. This one's not ready to go. So I'm just not going to send that email back to the client because I can't start that one because I got this other one going on. And it's like nobody's better at shuffling time and resources than people like us in our jobs. But at the same time, that same thing that you had when you were a kid, it's also the thing that frustrates us more than anything else. It takes more of our time and energy than anything else because we can't automate the way that we do our work. Whereas, again, in a couple hours of having this conversation from an idea that then resonated with 20 years of my personal experience in the industry of marketing, basically says, look, this isn't going to be easy, but if you started to put together things that said to clients and vendors, here's all of the steps, sign up for this and say that these steps are what you are accepting. But no, client, if you don't get me this thing that I have to have before I can move to this next block, we're, when we have our next weekly call to say, where's status at, I can look at a board inside of Asana going, it's exactly where it was last week. You haven't given me what I need to give to. So instead of, again, it in the past, I would write all that up and I would feel really good on Saturday. I'd be like, I'm gonna take all this great data and I'm gonna turn it into something. I never turned it into anything. It just stayed in a big, huge, Drive folder or Dropbox folder of good ideas that, and then Monday would come and I'd have 100 emails that I had to play the Plunko game or the board shuffle that I have on my wall as who's doing what this week and who's going to get what out and when are they going to get. But to be able to take all of that and put it into a template that I really do. I mean, when I gave that to one of my assistants today, it blew her mind because typically in the past I would have given those stupid notes and all that stuff that I do on the weekend to my assistant, who would have to pull her hair out trying to figure out how she was going to turn that into what I wanted the end result to be. Instead, I just invited her to the Asana project, and she's like, "Oh my God, this is everything that we talked about. This is, including again all these blocks that in that project, if a block gets hit, it notifies the people that it needs to notify to say there's a block here." And that's what I mean about, we can all look at a process that's broken and say, how should we fix that process? But if 30 minutes later the process is fixed through software and business rules and triggers and all the other things that we already use, you know, again, you don't have to magically make all of this stuff work. But if I take a typical 10-step project, and in the first quarter of 26 it's a 7-step project, and by June it's a 4-step project, and by the end of 26 it's 1 step, that's huge. But going back to what
That's a
you and I
dream.
said, you only do that by doing it. That's the only way to determine of the 10 steps how many you really can either make better or eliminate, which to me is the ultimate better.
Yeah, yeah. The elimination of steps is something that I think. when we talk about using AI wrong, right? Like I had previous conversations with someone else that specializes in AI, and the guy says like, "That's not wrong. It's just different." I'm like, okay. But one thing that I noticed is that because AI produces content so much in such a little time, one thing that I've noticed, even like within my teams, sometimes is that extra steps are added because AI created
Yep.
them. It's like, oh, that would be amazing. Look, and then suddenly something that was 3 steps becomes like a document of 10 pages with like 35 steps. I'm like, why are we doing that? It's like, these are not the SOPs. It's like,
Right, because it wants to validate
yeah,
all of the stuff that it just gave you, and it's like, well, wait a minute, what I thought you were reducing the need for that. Yeah,
yeah,
right. But
yeah.
but but it's also it's and we've had this conversation too, and that to me is another bullet point of you're using AI wrong. And when I go to companies and I sit down with them for a day, this is the conversation that I say before I get there. You guys need to know everybody needs to have access to all of the AI tools that your company uses, all of them. Like, because again, we've got a lot of companies that are like, oh, well, I don't want them to not do the work. And I'm like, that is the work. And if you don't give them access, give them the next 3 to 6 months to make all those mistakes, they're going to be 3 to 6 months behind because it's going to take them 3 months to really kind of, you know, feel like, okay, what is this that this is going to do for me?
Not only that, like there is a part of like using AI that it's a curse in itself that once you start working with it, every single day there are like 10 new tools
Hmm.
out there that they do some part of it a bit better. So before it was like Midjourney was creating great images, and then came Sora that was creating some videos like with some problems, and then you were comparing. Now Nano Banana is doing a bit better with text on the image. And the thing is that as a leader of my company, I invest a lot of time daily on testing and implementing new things in my own processes or in my own team. I see areas where I could automate some bits or make things a bit better, right? But not all the employees, especially if you don't empower them to do these tests or give them the tools for them to practice, they would do exactly the same thing. So if you by default you don't offer anything, you don't even teach them because you're afraid that they're gonna work less, you're already shooting yourself in the foot because
Absolutely.
the competitor is already kind of like doing way more than that. Like, and and I've noticed the amount of the output and the quality once you just empower someone to make mistakes and test something, and then by using one of these tools the output is better quality and the volume is way bigger.
Yep. Yeah.
It happened in my own team. I saw it. But yeah, I think this comes down to the part of the consultancy that we do for our own clients in a way that the way we do partnerships, as you said, like with the clients, is more like we have their backs and we have the expertise to say, look, if you're not doing that, I'm telling you, it's like
Yeah.
we're using that for you. It's like why you're not even using that internally.
Yeah, yeah, and we're a trusted resource. That's the other, big benefit. They always use us, which is why they're all asking us the same questions. Again, you and I have this conversation all the time. The number one thing I was asked in 2025, and I've been doing SEO since 2007, and the number one question in 25 is what is AI search? Which again, I have to go into lots of different places to explain AI search and that it's still search, but there's lots of other things inside of AI that, again, you're going to be able to get out of that. Instead of links, you're just going to get answers that you can then talk to. And that's different than links that you have to click on to determine, again, all of the stuff that's going in. But again, our clients want us to say, it goes back to that wasting time. Our clients like, I'm very nervous about this because I think I'm going to make the wrong decision and then I'm going to feel like I waste all that time. And again, the response is, it doesn't matter. Yes, you are. You're going to pick the wrong technology and you're going to change it. But when do you want to pick that wrong technology? Like, we had this conversation when I told you what I used to do with my programmers. Back in the day when the programmers would come to my office, stand in my door and go, this enhancement request, it can't be done. If we do this, it's going to break these other three things. And, then we won't be able to do this, then the other thing. And I totally understand. You go and show me 10 ways that that can't work. And when you've finished showing me the write up on the 10 ways it won't work, I will take that off the enhancement board. It will no longer work, which again was they went back to their desks and three mistakes later, it was solved. Always. I mean, it's if you're 10 mistakes away, when do you want to get started on the mistake making? And so for people that are like, I don't want to start this now because I think I'm going to make a mistake and I don't want to waste time going into it doesn't matter. I mean, you have to go in and you have to start making your mistakes and you have to go in and start eliminating platforms that don't work for whatever your system is. At least then you'll be able to say the reason this platform didn't work is because it didn't, I couldn't do teams or I couldn't have collaborations inside of the this, that, and the other thing, or the APIs didn't work the way that we needed them to. Again, I want all those questions answered and I want them answered yesterday. So a company and that's the only other thing too, and I've said this before, I've been doing SEO since 2007, which is a very, very long time. It should be shown on my face how much SEO I've done. And in those, up until that point, our cycle used to be 5 years. We would start an emerging technology company knowing that in 5 years it would be something else or it would become a commodity. Like, we did hosting also in the 90s and we did email management. We did, server administration. We did all those things when you could charge $100 an hour for the service, when it basically became something that you get with a Happy Meal. We're out.
Yeah.
It's a commodity, right? I mean, I can't play on that space. I can only play on you need experts. I have the experts. That's what we're gonna do. When we did that with SEO, I thought the same thing. This 5 years, something else is going to come along. 20 years later, well, look at that. This is the first year that I've said to my clients, SEO is changing. So now SEO is going to be and look a different way than it has before. And I also said, look, you guys know me because I've been doing this a long time. I have never seen an emerging technology come at us as fast as this is coming at us. And so if you tell me that you're going to not worry about this one and you're not going to get more educated and experienced into how these things are going to change your business, your company, your employees, your customers, and your industry, you're going to get killed. Like, I've never said about any technology that this is going to, wipe out whatever it is that it's going to wipe out. But I also am in the business of going to my clients and saying, let's look at everything that we can look at that will help you gain a competitive advantage over your industry. And I flip AI around to say, if you're not using it in everything, optimizing your operations, making sure your communications with all of the communications partners you have, from clients to vendors to whatever else, to tech support, to knowledge base creation, to platforms, to reporting, to all of those things, lead generation, qualified lead generation, conversion rate optimization. If you're not doing that, you're at a competitive disadvantage. So if you want to be at a competitive disadvantage to everybody else in your industry, then wait on AI. Simple as that.
Yeah. And just to touch some points that you mentioned, I think one of the mistakes that I see, well, these leaders of these companies that are not embracing the technology, is that they're postponing a decision, and the cost of that indecision it's when they realize it's going to be too late,
Yes.
right? And the fact that you're like when you're going to choose the wrong tool, right? It reminded me of the expression that is, we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for progress. It's progress over perfection, right? And that means you implement something, right? You see a problem in your, not a problem, an opportunity to introduce an automation, an opportunity to introduce some sort of AI that is going to replace someone or part of someone to do a task, right? And that has an improvement. And tomorrow you're going to try again. Like tomorrow you're going to figure out another tool that can be done, or you're going to realize there is another step to do that. So it's like the progress, right? Or like the Kaizen
Right.
principle of like mini improvements, right? That compound in a really big improvement afterwards. So, but it all comes down to the person taking the decision to taking a decision, and the decision is not like, I don't know what to do. It's like, even if you're unsure, you don't need 100% certainty of something to take the decision. It's like 50% plus one is more than enough.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's the whole, don't make the perfect be the enemy of the good. Right. And
Yeah,
it's again,
exactly.
and when I have those conversations, it's like, yeah, but you don't even know what good is yet. Yeah, again, because you're just sitting there, it's like we're not even in the part of the conversation where we're talking about perfect. We're zero. But that's again, that's the way that I'm trying to get my clients to look at this differently. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is really important is you have to be aware of the fact that yes, there are probably people inside of your company, especially the ones that have worked really hard to be super good at the things that they do. And they're going to be worried that now, this next person is going to be able to come up and do this just as good as I have done it in the past, and they didn't have to spend 10 years doing it. And you have to be aware of that and have those conversations and say, yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. But here's what I need you to know. You were really good at that. That means you're going to be really good at a whole lot of other things that you have told me over and over and over again. Well, if I just had the time, if I didn't have to do all of these other things. Well, guess what? We can build automations now for all those things that you're saying it drives you crazy that you have to do those things and you can't do these things. What I come back to my team on is you are not going to lose anything. You're not going to lose hours. You're not going to lose time. You're not going to. I mean, none of it. If you're already bad at your job, AI is not just. I mean, it's not going to help you not be bad at your job. You're bad at your job. I mean, we'll have to have different conversations about that. If you're good at your job and you're going to jump on board with this, you're going to be even better at whatever the next part of your job that you're going to be doing that I don't even know you should be doing. This is similar in the same way that so many technologies. So this is the one place that I have told my clients, here's the thing that makes it the same as all the other technologies that we've been using for the last 20 years, which is all of it was supposed to save us all this time, and we were going to have all this time and nobody was going to have to work and all the rest of that stuff. And turns out we worked much longer, and like email and all those things were going to save us all that time, right? Well, yeah, it turns out it just meant we do email at home when we were done with dinner. Instead of the old days where you went into the office at 9, came home at 5, and you didn't look at anything else until 9 o'clock the next morning. There's no, there's no 5 o'clock anymore, right? Well, so all that time we were supposed to have, we just got more clients, did more work, and build out. This is similar in that my expectation for my team is we should be able to grow more with less and do better work. And if we can do that,
Hmm.
but we're designing this in a way that we put guardrails on and say, okay, we know when we need to add people and we know when we can, but you should be able to do better work, not more, better. And that to me is the the big thing. One of the things that's in the automation part that I was kind of writing up that I think makes a whole lot of sense is we have to spend more time on workflow and redesigning the whole part of that workflow before we go straight into automation, because there's parts of that workflow that don't or don't need to exist anymore. But when we start, when we start AI over here on bullet point 8, we're designing when we should have started back here on 2, going, wait a minute, why don't we redesign the way this whole thing works? And there is no 8, because then we can start on 4, because 5, 6, 7, and 8 are gone. They're unnecessary. And that's the other thing, because this is so new and it's coming at us so fast, that we're not spending enough time designing what that workflow looks like. And we need that. We need to look at the restructuring of how that goes before looking at how we make it go, in a different manner.
Yeah, I think to that point, at least from my experience with other business owners, the vast majority of them, they don't even have the workflow. They're like, this is how I do it. And then they may have super structure in their minds, but the exercise that I do, usually I personally do it with my assistants, just like, I need to pass something to her. And we jump into a call and I start doing it and recording. And then I create Google Docs, simple bullet points, like, do this, like in the least amount of words possible. And then I keep doing it. And lots of times I realize that, like, oh, I actually do this. And this is really complex. Like sometimes it's just a different SOP only for that thing. And sometimes I wrote the whole thing and then I realized, like, why am I doing that? Like it brings zero values. Like it moves the needle like almost nothing. Like, can we do it better? But the thing is that the exercise of taking out of my mind and writing down already helped me figure out inefficient steps, or steps that shouldn't even exist, because the outcome of that step in itself, it's
Right.
ridiculous, right? So, but my main thing is getting the process out of someone's head, either by recording. If they do the recording with someone else explaining, it's easier than them doing themselves alone. And if they do that plus writing things down, that's kind of the sweet spot. And then you can give that SOP, simple SOP, plus the recording to someone else, and they have to kind of like make sure that that SOP works. So someone else needs to leave and try to do the same task, right? From the beginning to the end, right? Ideally, what I do is, like, after that they go away, they come back, and then I say, look, okay, perform the task in front of me right now, thinking out loud. So then I can see if they skipped something that I may have done it intuitively in between tasks, in between steps,
Yeah.
right? So, but as I said, like, my main issue is that the vast majority of the owners, or of their technical teams, right, their specialists, it's just that the process is not documented at all, let alone thinking about automating something.
Right. Right.
Because sometimes they protect these as if, like, if I tell people what to do, I'm going to be fired because the AI is going
Right,
to take
right.
over.
Well, and the other thing I think that happens to a lot of owners too is we don't have any concept of time. So again, when we're playing that game on our calendar and we're saying, this, and this, we know how to do enough stuff that, again, if it's something that is due by 9 o'clock the next morning and it's 8 o'clock at night, I'm not calling up one of my team and saying, do this. I'm doing it. And then it's ready for whatever the thing is at 9 o'clock. But that goes into what we were talking about at the beginning. We're all creatures of habit, and we're all, it's like, I've worked at this long enough to be able to say I know what I'm really good at, and since I'm really good at this, I don't want to do it a different way. I'm comfortable. It's yeah, it's wrong, but it's comfortable, and I know how to always kind of float back into it. But again, by not putting the time into that SOP, like you said. And you're a teacher. I mean, I do agree with the statement that if you really want to know how to do something, teach it to somebody else, because it forces you to, all that stuff that's just in your head. Because again, it also goes to the other thing that you talked about, and I talked to somebody else about this last week. There's no college degree for sales. I mean, it blows me away. There's marketing, which again, a lot of times is just, you know, easier, let's call it easier sales. It's not relationships, it's not knocking on doors, it's not, sales is sales. But just like I always compared really good salespeople to doctors. And a doctor's going to go and do the education and do the residency and do all the stuff they have to do, but then once they're a doctor. And you want to really irritate an industry. I remember this because I had friends that were doctors in the early aughts, where they said, oh, maybe it's not a good idea to make docs work 36-hour long shifts, because if you're the patient that's got to deal with that doc at hour 34, you think you're going to get the same thing that you got it. And so we changed all that, and then the docs are like, no, you need to do this. It's like taking a Marine going, you don't have to go to boot camp, you don't have to make it through Hell Week. It's like, no, you can't stand next to me, having not done the things that I've done, which I completely get and I completely understand. But again, that's not like we started this conversation with. Everything I do is, how can we make this better? And I like that, because I go into all of my conversations and all of my situations with, we can make this better. I don't care what it is, but we can make this better. And I can do that internally, and with 99% of my clients, I can do it with my clients, and they all trust me enough to go, yeah, well, I know you can. You tell me how to do it, and we'll go for it. And again, it's it still comes down to eliminating steps that we don't need. It's harder to do now with our teams, only because again, they sit back and they think to themselves, it took me so long to get to this point, and I'm finally, feeling like I'm in a groove, and now you want to completely and totally pull the rug out from under me. And I empathize, I do understand, but I just want to flip that around to try spending some time looking at this the other way. And if you don't, and if you're just not comfortable with it, there's plenty of places you're going to be able to go to do things the same old way. They're going to be hanging on for, they're not all going to go out of business next year. But I'm giving you the opportunity to find the things that you really do love to do and do more of them. Which again, in marketing, that was always things that we used to do. Here's the thing you and I talked about last week that I still think is worth, when we're trying to find really good associations to, how is this going to make our jobs, our industries, our customers, how is it going to make things better? It goes to what you were talking about with the SOPs. If you still think, or let's just take myself, for example, when I think about how many hours a week that I spend in meetings that are unnecessary because of the way that the meetings are structured, I could get 10 hours of my week back immediately. And I always went back to email. Like when email came out in the 90s, and then really, became very useful in the aughts, it was because when we first started out, we said, look guys, email's taking care of the fax machine. And again, I know that there's going to be a lot of people listening to this going, what's a fax machine? Well, look it up with the LPs and the other thing I mentioned in the earlier part of this. So in the early days, an email basically took the place of something that had to be in writing, that you had to see and read, and oftentimes had to sign. Where it went wrong was when email replaced the phone. And so when email replaced the phone, and you didn't have to make phone calls anymore, and you didn't have to leave voice messages, and you didn't have, where your decisions couldn't be, furthered until you had that communication with whoever it needed to. And so when email took the place of the phone, that's when the hours went up, not down. So all that time we were supposed to save, because now we can just send emails. Yeah, name me one person that spends less than 2 hours a day on their email, which is all ineffective time. There's just no way that's, and meetings aren't any different. So again, I always looked at that use of email being, okay, so since you're not reading this and you're not up on where we're supposed to be on this project or this whatever. You're just sending me this big long email. Or I love the ones where they'll send me an email from somebody else, and on top of that email to say, what do you think about this? And what they get back from me is really, really bad. So I'm like, oh, so you want me to read an email that you got that you don't understand and what, interpret it for you? I mean, it's like you could not waste any more of my time. I mean, they'll get a bill with $150 an hour being my rate stapled to that email message going, this email took me 30 minutes to read. Here you go. Our meetings are the same way. Our meetings are just, they're being justified by people that are too busy. And I get it, too busy, but then we all have to get together once a week to talk about how busy we are and the status of things that should have been communicated in all kinds of other ways. So you and I talked about this. I learned this when one of my kids was in an algebra class in high school, and they did a flip class. And so the flip class concept was, you're going to go home and watch a video of how to do this concept. And then the next day you're going to come in and you're going to do the homework in class. So you learn the lecture by watching a video the night before. You do the homework in class where you're with the teacher and you're with the rest of the students. That's where you're going to be able to ask your questions. And I'm like, well, that makes perfect sense to me. Again, great efficiency. And I'm like, I'm going to start doing meetings that way. I'm going to start sending my clients 15-minute videos going, here's the report we're going through. Here's where we're at on that report. Here's where we're doing well. Here's where we might want to change things, all the rest of that stuff. And then you can tell me the next day if we need to meet. Now, if you want to talk for 5 minutes and, you know, shoot the breeze and talk about the kids and whatever, I'm totally down with that. But that's a phone call. That's not a meeting. And in all these meetings too that we're talking about, very rarely is it usually just a one-on-one. There's usually 4 people in the meeting, right? So
Yeah.
in trying to figure out, you know, workflow redesign, that's part of workflow redesign. And if you've got clients that push back on the we want to have fewer meetings, you need to look at your client list, because you're going to be dealing with somebody who likes inefficiency or doesn't have enough to do. And at least in my business, that's not the direction I need to be going, with people going, my God, that's brilliant. I'm going to pay you just for that idea because I'm going to do it throughout my organization. And all to me it really says is, make sure everybody is ready to do the work if you're going to have the meeting. Like we've all seen and been a part of those meetings where, again, there's 10 people that, again, if you broke it all down, they're $100 an hour people. So for an hour, we just spent $1,000, right? Boy, you better be able to tell me at the end of that hour that we just efficiently spent $1,000.
Yeah. I think we could have like a whole episode of me having a rant about
Sure,
meetings like that.
sure.
I like honestly, it's one of the things that it's one of the things, the first things that I cut whenever I started working with any kind of new client, right? It's just like in their businesses, in the get together that we have, or even like with my team members when they're new and they come to me either with that email that it said like FYI, like and then like, and then I sent back like, can you tell me what this email is about?
Right, right.
And what are your thoughts, right? And then it happens the same thing with meetings. When someone comes to me on the chat to say like, oh, do you have 5 minutes? And then I'm like, I may have if you send me a concise paragraph explaining why you want 5 of my minutes, because people are just used to kind of waste someone else's time.
A lot of times
But
I look at it like, and you're going to start dealing with this. So similar to the, when do you want to start making your first mistake if you got 10 to go? I used to do it with my kids all the time. So when your kid comes to you and says, I don't know how to do this, and a parent then just takes it, does it, and says, now do you understand? And the kid's just smiling at the parent going, yeah, I understand. You just did my homework. My kids hated doing that with me, guy that started businesses in college, when their mother has 2 master's degrees and, is a current school teacher. So, because when they would come to me with that issue, I would say, how many steps do you know how to do? So, whatever the thing is, book report, math problem, whatever, I want you to tell me where you get stuck. Not that you're stuck, where did you get stuck? Because I'll help you with that step. But then you're going to take that step and you're going to go, do the rest of it. And it's the same thing. I think that's where these meetings come from. I think the people that we're talking to, whether internally or externally, get to a place where they're stuck on a problem. And instead of saying, here's the problem, they say, let's have a meeting to talk about the problem, and all of the other stuff that I could have done in between saying I need this meeting and doing this thing all stopped because I couldn't solve for this one thing.
As I said, we could keep bashing these inefficiencies, but I'm gonna think I I I I think it's a good time for us to kind of hit a pause because we're gonna have to jump back into another conversation.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. But again, I mean, this is how all of our stuff always goes. It's a mixture of, but at the same time, we can't have these conversations. They're not coming from ideas. They're coming from what it is like to live in that world, be in that trench, and make all those mistakes. I mean, these are not coming from, you know, things that we read about in books. These are
yeah,
things that happen in our everyday business lives and in the everyday business lives of everybody in business. Because you don't even want to see, I'm having this conversation with you. I would be embarrassed to show you my calendar for tomorrow, December 23rd, because of the meetings that I have to go to tomorrow on December 23rd. When I told all of my clients, by the way, that I was going to be done on December 22nd.
well, that's why I kind of like
Yeah, you
stole
did.
your
But I would
last
do
slot
I'll do
of the
this. I'll
day.
do this all day long. So that's never a problem. But again, that's the other thing that I really do like about, I will say this. I am very excited about AI. I've been excited about AI since I really started to look at it as another emerging technology. And I'm really excited about 26 because I do, as an entrepreneur, especially a busy entrepreneur, it's really easy to say, boy, I'd really like it if. And then again, what I always say is, then Monday comes. Like like you go to the conference and you're just all hopped up on the latest whatever it is, and you're gonna come in on Monday and you're gonna do the thing, or you go to the seminar and you're just, and then Monday. It's always Monday. And then again, you're 2 hours deep in because you were out of the office Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and by the Thursday after that, you don't even remember that you were at a conference on last Friday. So if you've done this long enough and you're looking at AI and you're like, I really want to be able to implement some of these things to see, because there's going to be places where these things will still break. But, you know, I'm excited about seeing where they break. And like we said, if it's an 8-step problem and by the end of the year I make it a 4-step problem, that is enormous progress in my book. Now, if, like you said, it's an 8-step problem that becomes a 15-step problem because there's new validation in the new AI driven model, yeah, then we got a problem. But that's why we got to design the
Yeah,
workflow first.
just wanted to thank you so much for joining this episode, and for those who are looking for someone like you to guide them through it, that they like this blunt and straight to the point approach that I personally love it. That's why we kind of work together. um, where did where can they find you?
Well, I've been saying this for the last 20 years because I don't have a very similar to you. My name is not, my name, Chris Robino. That was in my very first SEO company. It even said it on the business card. It said, Google me. So that's where you're going to be able to pull up all of my stuff is just Google Chris Robino, and all of my craziness is going to be there. So that, and, LinkedIn and all the rest of the stuff, I would say, just call Gledsley, but I don't want, I don't want to put, again, we just spent an hour talking about how meetings drive us crazy. We don't need any more stuff.
I'll guide
Right.
everyone towards your social media then, at least your
Yeah.
LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's where you can find all that stuff.
Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. And this is just like a pause in the
That's
conversation.
all right.
We're going to come back at some point.
It's,
Right.
it's been a great 2025 for lots of different reasons. And you've got young kids, so you've got a great holiday coming up. And again, I'm really looking forward to this new technology and stuff that we're going to be able to do in 26. So I am nothing but optimistic with opportunity.
Me too. All right.
All
Thank you
right.
so
See you
much.
later.